Well, thank you. It's very good to be back. The last time I was here was in 2019, and it's wonderful to be here again. So thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about the following things. So I'm going to walk around because I'm a teacher, so I can't actually stand still. We are supposedly frustrated actors, I think, teachers. I'm going to talk about these things. So choosing the right course, how competitive is Oxbridge, because a lot of people think that they want to go to Oxbridge, applying from Malaysia, how to make a winning application, preparing for entrance tests, and preparing for interviews. So kind of the nuts and bolts, really. So there's kind of a mantra that I want to kind of talk about and talk through in the first instance. Why do you go to the UK? Why bother? You've got great universities in this part of the world, and even you've got some UK outposts in this part of the world. Newcastle, there are medical programs you can do from UK universities in Malaysia. So why bother going halfway around the world and potentially paying more money to do so? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons, really. The power and the prestige of these institutions. We have many of the world's most renowned and recognized universities. But I think there's also a few other things. I think UK degrees travel extremely well, globally. And so I think if you have and graduate with a UK degree, I think that can mean an awful lot. So I think there's that. There's choice. We have, I think, somewhere in the region of about 130,000 different courses that you could do in the UK at over 120-something institutions, many of which you may not have heard of, but certainly from the top, let's say 50, top third universities, there's about 55,000 choices of courses. So it's just massive in terms of what you can and can't do. So, and I think the other point is that the degree from a UK institution is internationally recognised with employers. I think employers across the world understand UK degrees. I think they respect them and admire them, and I think that makes for a pretty competitive graduate. So why do I say course first, university second? I think there are too many people internationally who say, I want to go to Oxford, or I want to go to Cambridge, or I want to go to Imperial, but they don't think through the process of application. The reality is, these universities are incredibly selective. So therefore, they're looking for people who are genuinely passionate about what it is they want to study. So if you're simply choosing the university, that is going to present some problems as you make your application. I'm going to talk about the application itself and what you have to include. But it's really important that you think about the course choice. Why? You're going to do it for 3 years. It's the longest course you'll ever have done. GCSEs, 2 years long. A-levels, 2 years long. The IB, 2 years long, at diploma level anyway. So 3 years at a minimum is a really long period of time. And what are you going to do on a cold February morning when 9 o'clock comes around? You've got to get out of bed and you've got to go to lectures. You're going to want to do that for something that you genuinely enjoy doing. So it's really critical, this decision. And therefore, it's very important that you choose something you generally want to study. So how do you work this out? In my view of being a teacher, and obviously working for Keystone, there are broadly 3 camps of students. And I guess, maybe given we've got not very many people here, we could do it by show of hands. But there will be some of you who want to study one of your sixth form subjects. So maybe you're doing history, or maybe you're doing economics, and you want to study that very thing at university. So you could do that. You could be in that camp. The other thing is that you might study something related. So you might say, well, look, I want to do business management, and I do economics at the moment at university, and I do maths. These are related subjects to the degree you might want to do. Or the final group, which I find is actually an increasing group, is you have absolutely no idea what you want to study. Now, there are some really great tools, actually, that you can use to work out what are the best subjects to study. So if you're doing A-levels, or even if you're doing IB, you can look at your higher level subjects, and you can use this link here, which is called the A-Level Explorer. It puts your A-level subjects in, and then it churns out the degree types that you could apply for. So it's just worth noting at this stage, if you want a copy of my presentation, if you come over to our stand and you give me your email address, I can send it to you, because all the links are live and you can use them as a process. So what's really important is you start to think about what can you learn from what you're already studying. What are you interested in? Why are you interested in it? Are there parts of the subject you're studying that you're particularly interested in? And if so, what interests you about that? Once you start to think about these things, you'll start to work out what it is you might want to do for the future. Another thing could be, do you have a fixed idea of what you want to do in the future? So a lot of people from this part of the world tell me they want to do vocational degrees, engineering, medicine, veterinary. These sorts of, we call them vocational because it means you will be the thing you study, fundamentally. So you need to work out and think about what your studies currently tell you, but also you need to think about perhaps what you want to be in the future. And the reason for that is some of these degree types, they require specialist subjects. You need to have studied certain things to sixth form. If you haven't studied them, you don't qualify for that degree. That makes sense. So I guess my mantra about courses is you must choose something you enjoy and don't just focus on the university itself. So you might be asking, what are these courses? So here are some of the most popular courses that are applied to in the UK currently. So you have 3 schools here. I would say there are 4 schools generally. You've also got another school called languages, so your French, your Spanish, etc., and all of those sorts of things. So in the arts and the humanities, you're looking at art, design, English, geography, history, so philosophy, those sorts of things. Social sciences, very popular. Economics, law, very popular degrees in particular. And then on the STEM side, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Okay, that's the kind of abbreviated term you'll find in the UK. Computer science, particularly popular. Medicine, particularly popular. Yeah. So there are more, as I said, I've got more courses in these fields. And again, if you want a copy of the presentation, do come to our stand and I can share them with you. So it's all very well. Those of you who don't want to do a vocational course like law or medicine or dentistry, which means that you become the very thing you study, let's say you wanted to do something like history, for example, what would you become? Well, if you look at it that way, you can look at schools of subjects and look at the particular careers that come out of it. So people who do humanities and arts-related degrees will often go into things like education, charity, communications, heritage, journalism. Yeah? If you're in the social sciences, accountancy, law, finance, management consultancy. And again, if you're on the STEM side of things, you can understand sort of engineering, medicine, dentistry, those sorts of things. So again, if you're not sure what you want to do, what you can do is find tools out there where you can put in your subjects that you're interested in now, the subjects you find most appealing. You can put them in and it'll generate the kinds of jobs you might do in the future. So there are some really helpful things like that. So options with your subject. This is one made by Prospects. It's a sort of a big sort of graduate recruitment sort of company. Match your A-levels, that's quite a good thing. You do a quiz where it tells you what sort of degrees would you do with the A-levels that you study. Yeah. So these are kind of ideas generating tools which present to you the options that you might study at undergraduate level, and then thinking about what that might translate into with regards to your career. So let's get down to the key things, my top tips here. So if you want to be a medic, for example, or you want to be an engineer, it's really important that you understand what the requirements for these subjects are. So just go on their websites, have a look, see what they're requiring and they're requesting. Yeah? And this is a really important process because in the UK, we are incredibly meritocratic. We are really interested in grades. That's fundamentally what we're interested in when it gets to undergraduate level. Okay? So it's really important that you realize the system of how it works. So here's an example of a university webpage. It will tell you what essential subjects you must have studied, what subjects they'd recommend that you studied. What would it be helpful if? Yeah? If it's an essential subject and you haven't studied it, either IB or A-level or whatever the equivalent is you're doing, yep, you wouldn't be able to apply for that degree. You wouldn't meet the requirements for that degree. They also obviously give you grades. Yeah? So I would say in the UK, typically AA star A is the highest offering. And I would say normally around in the IB, you're looking at kind of 40, 41 would be the highest requirement typically. So make sure you really understand the university kind of requirements for different courses and you study them when thinking about what courses you want to apply for. Once you've got your course, you've then got to think about where you're going to apply for. It's lovely to think you might want to apply to Imperial and Oxford, somewhere else. But do you meet the entrance requirements? That's the critical thing. Yeah? And universities share all this information. So if you have any doubt, do make sure you check the websites. And they will list international equivalents. So the STMPs, I think which are the predominant qualification here in Malaysia, they will have equivalents for it. So they will say what you need to have scored at that level in order to gain entry. The final thing I wanted to note is IGCSEs. They are relevant and important, particularly for international students. So if you have the opportunity to do them, certainly the most academically selective universities will be particularly interested in those. They're not necessarily a requirement, but they are a mark of good academic sort of performance. So it is worthwhile thinking about that. So once you've considered kind of what the entrance requirements are, you know what course you want to study, you might then think about what kind of university do I want to study it at. So I would say broadly we have 3 types of UK universities. We have our campus-based ones, which are a bit like many of the schools that are out here. They're based in a confined campus. Everything's on one site. So you live, you eat, you sleep, you study, all in the same place. We have city-based ones, the most notable ones in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, in Manchester, in London. These institutions are based within the confines of the city. So you might have different departments based in different parts. They do tend to be kind of circulated around a particular area of the city, but invariably you will engage with the outside community a lot more than you would if you were at a campus-based university. And then the final lot are the collegiate universities. Oxford and Cambridge are the classic example. There's one more, which is Durham. But Durham is collegiate by halls of residence, where you stay. So what does collegiate mean? Collegiate basically means that Oxford and Cambridge are made up by about 33, depending on which university you're talking about, mini universities that all aggregate together. These are the colleges. You'll have heard of them, like Christchurch, Trinity, Queen's, these sorts of institutions. Yeah? And these come together to form the centralised University of Oxford or the University of Cambridge. At Durham, they do have colleges, but the colleges are where you stay. You don't do any teaching or learning within the college. It's just simply a place that you stay. So you might think about which kind of environment suits you best. Are you somebody that's incredibly sociable? You want to be out and about and living in a kind of a metropolis? Or are you somebody who perhaps would be preferred to stay within a campus where everything's on one site? You know, are you looking for a big university? Some of our biggest universities have just under 50,000 students in them. Some of our smallest universities, campus and city-based, might have around 6,000 students. And I know some of the schools in Malaysia and Singapore, they can be pretty big themselves. So they're not actually far off the size of a school in some ways. Yeah? So it's thinking about the kind of place that you might be. So I guess my key point that I want to make here is you should always choose the course first. If you're unsure about what your current studies tell you, then start to use some of the tools I've talked about to try and work out what you might study with the interest that you currently have. Once you've found out what you want to study, then you start looking at the universities. Then you need to look at their entrance requirements and work out which university might suit you best, what kind of environment would suit you best. So let's move on to this idea of Oxbridge, because everyone, I find, wants to talk about Oxbridge a lot of the time. So how competitive is it? Well, the reality is these are trends for Cambridge and Oxford admissions data. This is the number of applicants. These are year on year. You can see both of these are going up. So despite the pandemic, despite economic shocks around the world, there are more and more people who are applying to these institutions. And how does that bear out on things like success rate? Well, the success rate is predominantly, if you look at these, so the green one is an international. So at Cambridge, to some degree, it's flatlining, but in Oxford, it's kind of reducing. So these are universities that are incredibly competitive, but the general trends are the number of applicants are going up, the number of successful applicants getting in are going down, yeah, across sort of broadly across the board. Now, obviously, just thinking about the independent schools that are out here, international applicants, you can see, are quite a bit lower than independent school applicants, which are these schools out here, UK independent schools. So what about in your country? Well, we're sat within Malaysia, obviously. So last year, Cambridge had 274 applications, and 9% of them won a place, or 10%, actually 9.9, whereas Oxford, there were 277 and 3.6%. So if you wanted to do engineering, you could do engineering science at Oxford, you could do engineering at Cambridge. If I was you, I'd look at the Cambridge course, because I stand 3 times a better chance of getting into Cambridge than I do potentially of getting into Oxford, if you look at it on a basic level of numbers. Yeah? I think numbers you need to be careful with because you shouldn't be guided by them explicitly. So the popular degree choices, I guess, are these. So these with the lowest success rates, but they're probably the most popular in this part of the world also. So things like computer science, economics. We talked about vocational courses, architecture being one of them, law, medicine. Yeah, these are courses that you study and that effectively then you potentially will come on to do these sorts of things. So this gives you a sense of kind of the success rates on average of people getting in. So they're very competitive. Yeah, you would argue that potentially there's a slightly more competitive side here compared to here. Yeah, but data is one thing. Yeah, when you go and speak to these schools, you'll note they're incredibly experienced. They understand these application processes really very, very well. And they will give you one-to-one support in that regard. So when you're talking to them about your application, they're going to be talking to you about what might suit you best, given your A-level choices, given perhaps your development over time at their school. They'll talk to you about what sorts of things you might want to apply for. But it does give you an indication that some of these courses are frighteningly competitive to get into. So just one quick question. Does anyone here intend on applying to read medicine? No? Becoming a doctor. Okay, good. The only reason I'd say that is because the medicine in the UK has quotas for international students. So actually, this success rate is about a third of this. It's more like 4% for international students because there are quotas of students that essentially are allowed in. So applying from Malaysia, there's not much more I can add other than what I've already said, which is we have a very meritocratic focus. We're really focused on essentially your academic profile. Check the prerequisites, so check what do they require, what subjects they require, what kind of grades they're looking for, so you understand the lay of the land and how competitive it is. English language is a key requirement. Yep. So you need to think about that. You may be at an English-speaking school, you may be at a British school, international school. You need to check what requirements they have of you. The only thing I would also say, and I probably shouldn't say this because we're at a fair where we're advertising the strength of UK independent schools, is you might choose to stay in Malaysia because there are a lot of UK university outposts that are based here. So you can read medicine at the University of Newcastle, which is a UK university in Malaysia. Why might you do that? It's a lot cheaper. So your parents might think that's a much better solution than sending you to the UK. So let's move on to kind of the application itself. There are broadly 5 areas of an application. So your personal details, your qualifications, these are the idea of predicted grades versus grades that you currently have. Your personal statement, we'll talk about what that is in a minute. Your course choices, the courses you've chosen, you can only choose 5. And then your reference from school, which is going to be a pretty critical part of the equation. So you can only choose 5 courses as I mentioned, and you only use 1 application. So 1 application includes 5 choices. So you need to think strategically about who you apply to, yeah, and thinking about the kind of predictions that you might have. So how can you enhance this application? How can you improve it? How can you make it stand out? There are many thousands of applications, as I said from the graph earlier. So one of the ways that you can do that is what we call supercurricular development. Okay? This is about exploring the course that you want to study above and beyond the curriculum you're studying in the UK or at an international school, extending your learning. Yep. Universities in the UK will expect you to do very well in your GCSEs, your A-levels, your IB. That's not exceptional. What they're looking for, the most academically selective ones, are the extent to which you've gone above and beyond the curriculum, the extent to which you're genuinely passionate about the subject you want to study. So you need to identify interests in the subject you've chosen to study. You need to think about why it is you're interested in those things, and you need to be able to demonstrate that, to communicate that in your application. So what can you be doing? Wider reading. You can be looking at articles in The Economist, in Nature, if you're particularly interested in engineering or science or medicine. Videos, TED, for example, is a fantastic resource. It's also much quicker. Some of you might sit there saying, I don't really want to read anymore, Ed. I know, I've taught, I understand what 16, 17, 18-year-olds are like within schools. But you can watch a video. It might only take 5, 10 minutes, or an online lecture, much easier, or a podcast. You can listen to one of those. Online lectures as well. Lots of universities offer great opportunities for you to further your interest. So that's a really critical part of your understanding. And this is an example of kind of a guided reading program that we might offer with tutors, for example, where you would look at some of the key themes that underpin the subject that you're wanting to study. We've got some good blogs as well on what more constitutes independent supercurricular learning. But the key thing is that you understand is that the most academically selective university, particularly Oxford and Cambridge, they are not interested in just you getting good grades. You need to be able to communicate your enthusiasm for the subject above and beyond that, because everybody will have good grades who's applying to these universities. So what is going to set you apart? So what do you do with this information once you've learnt it? You incorporate it into your personal statement. The personal statement is 4,000 characters, 47 lines, type 12, Times New Roman. It's basically 1 page of A4 typed text. Okay, in that, you need to communicate why have you chosen to study this degree and communicate your enthusiasm for it. All right? And this, for most universities that don't do any additional assessment or interview, is the only way you stand out. Because everyone else might be doing A-levels. Everyone else might be getting IB grades. So this is the only thing that's personal. It's your opportunity to communicate more widely. So it can be the differentiating factor. So you need to think about how you can elevate this to communicate your genuine enthusiasm for the subject you've chosen to study, for the course that you want to do. And they need to be able to feel that through the personal statement as they read it. Now, schools in the UK, but also international schools, they will work with you on a personal statement. They will help you develop it. But crucially, and I've been that teacher, I've been a head of sixth form, so I understand how that works. You can't develop somebody's personal statement unless they have done the supercurricular reading above and beyond the curriculum. They need to show genuine interest above the A-levels they're simply studying. So it's really, really critical that you think about this. So writing a good personal statement is key to this. The other thing is to think about who's reading this. The person reading this is going to be a subject specialist, or is going to be a trained member of the admissions team. And they might, for some courses, have to read thousands of these. So you need to think about how you differentiate your personal statement compared to others. Yeah? So that's pretty critical. So the final couple of things, the most selective universities and the most selective courses, are that they ask for additional levels of scrutiny. So things like entrance tests and things like interviews. So for a normal UCAS application, you choose your 5 courses, you have your predicted grades for your end of sixth form, and that's it, and your teacher reference from school. That's all you need. But for universities like Oxford, Cambridge, and for some of the vocational courses like law, medicine, dentistry, they require you to do more. They may interview you, and they may do entrance tests. So again, if you go onto the websites of the universities, you will see what they require of students, both international and home. So there are 2 types of entrance tests broadly. There's the entrance test you do before you go to interview, and there's the entrance test you do at interview. Okay? I've put them into 2 camps, pre-interview, at interview. At Cambridge now, they've changed the phrasing of this. They're called pre-college registered and college registered. I don't know why they've changed it, they've just changed the naming. But effectively, you either do it before you get invited to interview, or you do it at interview. I would say almost all, if not all, Oxbridge courses at Oxford and Cambridge interview or have an entrance test. Most of them will have an entrance test. There are very few that don't, and most all of them will invite you to interview. Or if you are good enough, they will invite you to interview. Some other courses, as I mentioned, law, medicine, maths, the TMUA. A lot of people who want to do engineering. Maths is quite a key component. Some courses will ask you to do the TMUA, which is the Mathematics University Assessment, for those of you who don't love an acronym. So what can you do? Universities share loads of information. They share past papers. They share guides on how to improve, how to develop, how to prepare for these kinds of assessments. So do make sure you check out that. Oxford and Cambridge provide a lot of past papers and guidance, both on the university website and then also on the college-specific websites. And then also we provide quite a few blogs on how to prepare for these tests. Then the final thing is interview preparation. So as I said to you, places like Oxford and Cambridge, things like medicine, they will invite you for interview. If you meet the threshold, they will invite you for interview. And so how can you prepare for that? How can you prepare for kind of understanding how to kind of approach an interview? I think it's worth understanding that the first place to start is your personal statement. So whatever you've written in your personal statement, you really need to understand. You really need to be comfortable talking about. So if you've communicated a particular interest on your personal statement, for example, in medicine, it might have been a work experience placement that you've done. If you are genuinely interested in something in there, you need to be prepared to talk about it. You need to be prepared to answer questions about it. That's a really critical component. You also then need to do some research. You'll find that a lot of universities who interview people provide guidance on how to prepare for interview practice. They may even give you sample interview questions. They may even produce videos of a sample interview or interviews of previous years, yeah, to give you guidance on what to expect. They don't want you to come to the interview process overly nervous, underprepared. They want you to understand kind of what's going to be expected of you, but they also want you to understand that there is an element of assessment in this. They are going to be assessing you to work out how good you are and whether they really want to teach you. I would say interviews, the fundamental thing they're looking for is something called teachability. They're looking for whether they look at you and they think, I want this person in my lecture hall, in my seminar. This person's going to be great to work with for the next 3 years. That's the fundamental thing they're looking for. So you need to consider basic and advanced questions. Practice using in your school. Family, friends, practice interviews. That is critical. Not enough practice, particularly international students. When I've spoken to Oxford and Cambridge admissions tutors, they say to me international students often feel under-practiced. They don't feel that comfortable talking in an academic sense and environment. So that's a really critical point. And then the final thing is, I would just understand a little bit more about the concept from people who've already done it, people who've experienced it. Yeah? So there's lots of great help out there on the interview. So for example, if I was applying to Oxford, I would go to Jesus College. Jesus College, I've got I think 120 videos on different practice interviews and a huge amount of information that's there for you to look at. So YouTube is an incredible resource, but there's also an incredible resource elsewhere. So there are guides to Cambridge University interviews, which you can download from our blog, which are freely accessible. So in a nutshell, those are the kinds of key points of preparation that you need to consider. So what's the timeline? Roughly speaking, when you're coming into your last year of school, so in the UK it'd be year 13, yeah, you would have early September. That's when you can apply. That's when the UCAS application process opens. The 15th of October every year is Oxbridge. So if you're applying to Oxbridge, that's the deadline for that, and other vocational courses like veterinary and medicine. And then the 25th of January is the deadline for all others. So if you're not applying to Oxford or Cambridge or medicine or veterinary science, then that would be the deadline for you. Although most schools out there, I'm sure, will ask you to apply well before. When I was teaching in my school, we used to have a deadline at the end of November, for example. So the end of March is typically the deadline for when you hear back from universities. Not always, but it's roughly around the end of March. The end of May is a deadline for submission. So if you've got from your 5 choices, if you've got 5 offers, which would be wonderful, you'd have to choose your first and your second choice, what's called your firm and your insurance option. And then obviously the results days, obviously as you know, mid-August would be A-level results, early July would be the IB results. That's the rough timeline. So this is what you're thinking about application. In terms of supercurricular reading and development, understanding about your course, that could start a year in advance of that date. So perhaps in the beginning of your penultimate year of school, you start to think about developing your interest, yeah, and exploring that over time. I would always advocate a slow and steady approach rather than cramming into the final summer before that September. And the final thing I would say to you is using a horrendous acronym, I realise, but I'm a teacher, so forgive me for doing it. So I've just used the UCAS which UCAS is the body through which you apply to UK universities, is use those around you. You've got wonderful family, friends, teachers at schools. They are an incredible walking, talking resource for guidance about course choice, university choice, writing a good personal statement, etc. Consider your career options. Think about those. In holidays, maybe do a work experience placement. Maybe better understand the kinds of things you want to go and do in the world. Talk to your parents. What do they do? Do they advise you do it? What is it that they want for you? Or what do they think you might be good at? They're older than you. They're wiser than you, probably. Most cases they are. Yeah? And they'll have a view as to what you might do. But also investigate. You can attend things like open days. There's huge, with COVID pandemic, there's virtual open days at every university pretty much. And then scrutinize the information. Be discerning. What do you want from the process? This is a decision where you will be most involved, I would imagine. Of your life to date, this is the decision where you're going to be most involved. So it's a whistle-stop tour. As I said, there's quite a lot of information in the PowerPoint itself, so if you want a copy of that, I'm delighted to give it to you. But I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have any questions about applying to Oxbridge, top universities in the UK? I'm sure you'll now be nervous enough not to ask me, but does anyone have anyone? Okay. Silence is not always a bad thing. If you have any questions and you don't want to ask now, you're welcome to come and find me at our table. But and also, if you want a copy of the presentation, then I can send you one via email so that you can have it. It's got lots of links and things like that, which would hopefully be useful.